if there is a benefit about this, it actually steers. Hello everybody, welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to wrap up the entire front end of the go-kart. Last time you seen it, we did the kind of a failure of doing body work, or at least tried to straighten the frame. But that doesn't really matter. I built that thing pretty strong, so I couldn't get it to twist straight or bend straight, so we're just gonna leave it go. We're gonna try to make the rest of it level, but that's for later on down the road. But today we're going to finish up the lower control arm shock mounts, part of the shock mounts for the lower control arm, the upper shock mounts, the cross member for the shock mounts, and we're going to mount the steering rack in place. Steering rack is comprised of the rack, two little straps I made to hold it in place, and that part of the cross member is another part off of the old frame, so nothing is going to waste, and I've made that before. So enough of that said, go watch it. Okay, so to start the shock brackets, I'm going to make a kind of a filler for the lower control arm. But what I did was I laid this down on the two flat edges and drew a line. After I get this cut out, I got to make another cut or another triangle. Then I'll do my magic, make these fit inside of the lower control arm, right in the middle, and that will be the start of our new shock bracket. And hopefully as well, this triangle will help brace the lower control arm more, or so the theory goes.
Science rules.
Okay, so I got my shock brackets, well, shocks in place. So the triangle I was talking about, I have a tack welded in a few spots. I had a carrier rear end, another go-kart back half, and I found these tabs. So I cut them off, and they actually made a pretty good shock mount. I got the shocks in place. They're both lined up, they're both even. And since these are really strong springs, they're 650 pound each, what I was thinking was having them probably about right there. It's because I want the lower control arm to have more leverage over the spring. Another thing I found out too, I took and wound these springs down so they're both at equal points. This is not even a shock. It's all spring. How weird is that? Oh yeah, and I was able to get more travel out of the suspension. I have O-rings all the way through here to help give more travel, because I don't really care about downward travel. I care more about the upward. I care more about that. I care more about that than downward because the thing's going to be low. Ain't gonna be much, but this thing is not a off-road machine. It's an on-road machine. It's a pavement pounder, hopefully. So I'm not really too worried about getting a lot of travel out of this, but if this does bug me, I'll find something else to space this out with. But so far, a fair amount of travel. Just a fair amount. So, next on the list is to mount these up and set this thing on the ground to see what it looks like. Alright, mind the fan butt. Shocks are on. And they are really, really stiff. But there is travel out of it. Some, not a whole lot. Remember, this is for street, this ain't for off-road use. Well, it could. But it does flex, everything moves. So next thing I'm going to do is work on the steering rack, because I know where it sits. Pretty much to mount the steering rack is you got to know where your center is on the frame. I still have a center mark on my frame, and you just got to build your brackets how you want. And it also does depend on how the steering rack is set up, because on mine I have to make clamps, almost like clamps that have it hold up and stay in place. So let me take care of that real quick, and then hopefully I'll have the steering rack mounted. Once you get your steering rack in place, you should have something that looks like that. I am so happy to see the front end all together. The upper, lower control arms, the coil springs, the rack, the hubs and knuckles, everything. Since these hubs I got they have bolts that go through them, I found longer bolts in my stash, thread them in that way, and now I have studs. So much better. Everything is still tacked together, so what I'm going to do, whenever it's another nice day out, I'm going to take and weld everything up solid. I literally had this vision of this front end kicking in my head for a month. Finally seeing it. It looks so great. And yes, we had a major issue from not paying attention to how these knuckles go. Had to remake both sides of the suspension, both suspension arms. Don't do things twice. That was at 8 o'clock in the morning. I started with the new control arms, and it's now like 9:30, and the front end is all done. The new upper lower control arms look great. It actually, these are actually an inch longer. Lower control arms an inch longer than what I had before. And like I said, an inch on each side makes it 2 inches wider. That 2 inches really just made a huge difference, because this thing actually looks pretty wide. And still, if you look down from the front to back to front, the front still looks narrow. So it fits my parameters of having a narrow front end. Before you say this is the wrong way of mounting a steering rack, it depends on how you mount it. This one I have, it has to be held in by clamps. So I made my own clamps. Well, straps. They're a little because they're off of the old go-kart chassis, but I mean, who's gonna see it? Who's gonna see it? Same with the shock mounts. They're okay. They need welded up. They need to weld it up and brace to the frame. They need welded up on the other side. Same with the lowers. This one busted off when I was trying to test out how the suspension travels. I took and re-welded it. But like I said, everything needs to be welded up solid. This cross member needs welded up. This one does. These two frame horns need welded up. This shock brace needs welded up, and the steering rack brace needs welded up. And also, as well as the plates that hold the actual shock mounts to the lower control arm. Everything needs welded up. Once we get the rest of the frame done, we get the pedals done, we get the steering wheel in, we get the driver's seat in, we get everything all done. We fine-tune the front end, and then hopefully soon this thing will be a Cadillac of all go-karts.
Small, it's a big trunk. I'll show you right here.
Well, you got a dead hooker in the trunk.
What? No, it can't be.
Yes, it was. It was a dead hooker.
It wasn't a dead hooker!
Pal, I know a dead hooker when I see one.
Oh, not a Cadillac. This thing's supposed to be a Buick. It's supposed to represent a Buick. Sorry. I mean, seriously, like, when are you ever gonna find a go-kart that's low to the ground, the suspension's low profile, everything literally fits in between the two frame rails? Everything fits between the two frame rails with zero issue. And it looks so good. If you can see it or not, this thing actually has a bit of a rake. It's nosediving down, which is actually what I really wanted. If there's anything I can say to end this video is don't give up. I screwed up on the front end. I actually wanted to stop this whole project completely until I figured out what I was going to do. Then took a step back. I thought about what I was going to do. Cost me some money, but I made new upper and lower control arms, and I just kept going on. I just kept pushing through everything. And the front end is finally done and it looks great. If you like this video, please hit that like button below. If you love how that suspension looks, hit the like button. If you have any comments about the parts I used, how I set it up, what were my measurements, how I did anything, make sure to ask down below. I don't go into detail in my videos because somebody else is going to do the same style idea, so I don't go into detail. Also subscribe as well, because right now, since the front end is done, we're going to start focusing on the middle and back half, and we're going to get it all done. Anybody got one of these fancy brooms? Snap-on Sweeper 5000? Does a pretty good job. Just needs adjusted.